If one is scanning a map of Pennsylvania's Laurel Highlands, you'll see a community named Acme. No, this is not where all the instruments of torture for Wile E. Coyote's attempts to capture the Roadrunner were shipped from. If I'm being quite honest, there isn't a lot to Acme, PA. But if one is passing through Acme on Route 31, you will encounter these odd signs pinned to telephone poles. If you follow them properly, you'll be taken on a drive into the thickest part of the woods that cover the Chestnut Ridge. But eventually you will be brought to the entrance of Polymath Park. Immediately you'll see the Treetops restaurant. But what makes this place truly special is what's down the gravel lane. This park is the location of 4 homes significant to the architectural history of the United States. Half of them were designed by America's most famous architect, Frank Lloyd Wright. Now hang tight, let me explain how 2 Wright structures came to call a remote plot of Chestnut Ridge home. Let's go back to the 50s. Frank Lloyd Wright is enjoying the tail end of a resurgence in popularity after the completion of Fallingwater. Even approaching 90, Wright was regularly employed in designing structures such as the Guggenheim Museum. But there was a dream he had yet to see fulfilled. He wanted all Americans to have the chance to live in his organic-influenced homes, a style he dubbed Usonian. Wright had attempted throughout his career to develop a cooperative community he dubbed Broad Acre City, but it never fully got off the ground. He turned to catalogs, hoping to sell prefab designs similar to Sears, Roebuck & Company. He found a contractor in the form of a Lithuanian-born architect named Marshall Erdman. Wright claimed he could design better houses for half the price Erdman's existing plans were selling for. The December 1956 edition of House and Home for the project exclaimed, "This is big news because it gives prefabrications, once the stepchild of home building, the prestige associated with the greatest name in contemporary architecture." There were 3 variations, of which only homes of the first 2 styles were ever built. In total, 11 prefabs were constructed. One of the 9 homeowners for what became known as the Prefab 1 design was the Duncan family of Lisle, Illinois, whose home was built in 1957. Though the prefabs were not a massive success, Wright had managed to set part of his dream come to light. Though his vision of a Usonia community had not been achieved, it was not entirely dead. In the early 1960s, 2 wealthy families out of Pittsburgh, the Balters and Blums, were looking to establish summer homes in the forests of the Laurel Highlands. They had been inspired by Fallingwater, the summer retreat of their friends, the Kaufmans. But with Wright no longer around, whom could design these homes in the Usonian style? Enter Peter Bernston, a student of Taliesin. He had been creating Usonian homes around the Pittsburgh area and was hired to design these 2 summer homes. But he hoped for something grander. The Blums and Balters had collectively purchased 130 acres of forested land near Acme. Bernston planned out 2 5-acre plots, along with 22 more plots of identical size. Bernston hoped to encourage the 2 families to be the first to live in a cooperative community he dubbed Treetops. However, the Blums and Balters preferred the privacy the large acreage provided them. As such, 2 starkly different Usonian homes rose up in a remote part of Pennsylvania. The Usonian community was not to be, at least not then. At the turn of the 21st century, the Poppincheks from Johnstown, Pennsylvania purchased a house in the Acme area. They were only made aware of the 2 Bernston homes down their lane after a chance encounter with college students renting out one of the properties. Not long after, the property owner was planning to clear-cut the forest for timber profit. The owner asked the Poppincheks if they'd be willing to buy the homes, which they did so in 2003. They hoped to rent out the 2 Bernston homes to guests vacationing in the Laurel Highlands. But something else was developing back in Johnstown. The Duncan family had lived in their prefab home the remainder of their lives out in Lisle, Illinois. After the passing of his wife, Donald Duncan sold off much of the 50 acres of land with a provision he'd be allowed to live out his final years in his home. A modern housing development quickly took the land and began constructing around the Usonian house. When Mr. Duncan passed away in 2002, the housing development planned to raise the Wright structure. A group of several Wright enthusiasts planned to relocate the home, piece by piece, to Johnstown. Tom Papinchek became one of those enthusiasts. But the original plans fell apart. Everyone save for Tom backed out of the endeavor. With nowhere else to go, Tom decided to rebuild the Duncan home on his property near Acme. Beginning in 2006, Tom and a small crew of 4 worked to reassemble the home. The masonry used to rebuild the house is not original. A decision was reached to replace the concrete blocks Wright had originally used with local sandstone. Reason being, it more closely ties the home to its new natural setting, something the reconstruction crew considered appropriate for Wright's idea of Usonia. Additionally, a full basement was added for the convenience of maintenance, something Wright would not have approved. In fact, there are several things within the home not typical of Wright's design. Several, such as the drop ceiling in the kitchen, were most likely made by Erdmann. Erdmann gave all buyers the choice of a carport or garage. The Duncans went with the carport, but several other examples exist with a garage which surely did not please Mr. Wright. In any case, in 2007, the Duncan house was open to the public, as was the whole property, rechristened as Polymath Park. Polymath, a person with encyclopedic learning, at least according to the Webster Dictionary. In 2008, the Popenchaks converted their home into the Treetops Restaurant in lieu of Bernstein's original name for the proposed community. The Duncan House and the Bernstein Retreat became popular with Wright enthusiasts who stayed the night here after traveling to Fallingwater or Kentuck Knob, but this would not be all for the Popenchaks. Nearly 1,000 miles away in Minnesota, another Wright house was going through similar troubles as the Duncan house had occurred. In 1952, Wright designed a home for the Lindholms, a family prominent in the region's oil and gas industry. The property was known as Mantilla, a Finnish word referring to the tall pines around the home. No contractor in Minnesota was willing to construct the house, with some dubbed the Crazy House. It took a crew of Finnish constructors to complete the house, hence its name. This was not the only collaboration between the two, as Wright also designed the Lindholm service station. 3 generations of the Lindholm and their descendants lived in the home, which featured approximately 80 angles to maximize sunlight. The home served its purpose well until the piping for the floor heating ruptured in 2015, forcing the Lindholm's grandson, Peter McKinney, to sell. However, the McKinneys could not find a buyer due to the encroachment of urban sprawl. After much debate, the decision was made to move the property to a safer location. The Frank Lloyd Wright Conservancy contacted the Popenchaks, and quickly an agreement was reached to relocate the house to Polymath Park. This move was far more complex than the Duncan house, as Mantilla was one of a kind. It was designed with the original topography in mind. Careful consideration was made in how the reconstructed house would be oriented on its new location in Pennsylvania. After multiple years of disassembling, shipping, and rebuilding, Mantilla was officially opened to the public in 2019. When one enters Mantilla, you will find 2 distinct sections. To get to the master bedroom, one must traverse a rather narrow hallway, which I admit to the guide made me feel uncomfortable. All part of the design. Wright had created an open plan for the sitting room and kitchen area, as this would be accessed by the public, while the bedrooms and office of Mr. Lindholm were connected by a private walkway with the tightness of the corridor meant to ward off any unwanted intruders. When you think of Wright, you think about his incorporation of nature into his designs. I found the view of looking out from the hallway into the public spaces that resembled that of looking down into the vastness of a cave. You've heard of nature reserves, but I don't think anyone has used the term architectural reserve. But that's exactly what Polymath Park has become. In a sense, the Popenchaks and the dedicated team at the resort have brought to life Wright and Bernstein's dreams of a cooperative Usonian community. Who would have thought it would have been along Chestnut Ridge near the Steel City? The dream is still a work in progress. During my visit, there's a group of shipping containers off the lane. These contain elements of the 3rd rebuild project Polymath Park has undertaken, and by the looks of the images, it will be the largest one yet. This is the next home slated for reconstruction, Birdwing. This home, originally located in Minnetonka, Minnesota, was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright Jr. in the 1960s. Its design included various wings, with each room themed after a different continent. It was owned by the Rupp family for 4 decades, only being forced to sell with the death of James Rupp in late 2018. The home was set to be razed were it not for the last-minute intervention by the Frank Lloyd Wright Conservancy. When the reconstruction of Birdwing is complete, Polymath Park will be the only place in the world you can visit the buildings designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, his son, and one of Wright's apprentices, all at the same site.